Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's MDDI webinar, Secrets to a Stable Sensor Supply, What You Should Consider, sponsored by TechScan and broadcast by Informa. This is the second day of presentations in our series, How the MedTech Industry Can Respond to Crisis. If you haven't already, I encourage you to check out this series at the link included in the Resources tab in the presentation window. I'm Amanda Peterson, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the Resources widget. Toward the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you are experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Now on to the presentation, Secrets to a Stable Sensor Supply, What You Should Consider. Discussing today's topic, we have Charlie Malacaria, Vice President of Business Development with TechScan. To learn more about our speaker, visit the Speakers widget. Charlie, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Amanda. So as Vice President of Business Development at TechScan, one of my duties is to oversee our FlexiForce Embedded Sensing division. That group works closely with companies to integrate our sensor technology into customers' products and devices. The medical device industry has been an important segment for TechScan over the years. We've worked with many companies to integrate our sensors into all sorts of therapeutic and diagnostic devices. As a result, we've gained some insights into the sensor supply chain. And while we're a sensor manufacturer and much of the information I will share is specific to our experiences, the general principles and core concepts I will cover in this presentation are applicable to any facet of the supply chain. My goal is to help you formulate a sound strategy for vetting component suppliers as you embark on your next device design or product redesign. Just to give you an idea of what to expect throughout the course of today's discussion, I'll begin by sharing a bit of background about TechScan and our experience in supplying a key embedded component to the medical device industry. From there, I'll move into a discussion of cost considerations when working with technology suppliers. Specifically, how to identify and mitigate potentially hidden costs associated with an embedded component. Finally, I'll give you some practical questions to ask an embedded component supplier that will help you gauge their stability and identify potential risks. I'd like to start by sharing a little more about TechScan. We manufacture thin, flexible force and pressure sensors, as well as complete pressure mapping systems. We've been in business since the late 1980s and have served a variety of customers across many different industries, each with unique application needs. Our customers range from engineers at large Fortune 500 companies to entrepreneurs at startups. We've had particular success in the medical device industry, where our technology has been used in hospitals, research institutions, dental offices, and even retailers like CVS and Walgreens. While we serve a varied group of customers, they all share one common requirement. They want to use a thin force or pressure sensor in their product, advance their research, or differentiate their clinical practices. As I mentioned earlier, FlexiForce sensors are at the core of TechScan's embedded sensing division. FlexiForce sensors are thin, flexible, printed, force-sensitive resistors, otherwise known as FSRs. They measure compressive forces between nearly any two surfaces. Along with being very thin and flexible, FlexiForce sensors are simple, passive resistors, and so they work with very low power electronics. This gives them an advantage over other force sensor types in many applications. Our sensors are available off the shelf in a variety of shapes and sizes, which is a nice way for engineers to get their feet wet with the technology. We also work with OEMs across industries to design custom form factors of these sensors for their OEM applications. FlexiForce sensors have been used in a wide variety of medical devices. A good application area example has been wearable medical devices. A particularly good example is embedding the sensor into insulin pumps, where the sensor is used to monitor the delivery of medication to the patient and to alert the patient of any blockages that occur in the system. We've also been embedded in smart medical training devices and HMI applications. As shown here, this breast palpation training tool is equipped with a matrix of force sensors to help clinicians and physicians learn the proper technique for performing manual examinations. In fact, any manual or mechanical physical therapy application procedure can be enhanced with force sensing components. For instance, an ultrasound wave therapy machine embedded with force sensors can help ensure more complete contact when massaging the patient. And this sensor can help enable a smart connected application for monitoring at-risk patients, whether at home or in the hospital. For instance, embedding a sensor into a patient's bed can enable a device to monitor their presence, making caregivers aware of their sleeping habits and alerting them if they have left the bed for an extended period during the night. So that's just a little glimpse into the work we do at TechScan. Now let's move along to a hypothetical scenario. Suppose you're an engineer working for a medical device manufacturer and embarking on designing the next great medical device innovation that will include an embedded sensor component of some kind. You've narrowed down your requirements, you've decided on a technology, you've combed through specs and data sheets, and you've developed a short list of suppliers that seem to offer you all of the right things. But before you proceed with your prototype, you should consider all of the costs associated with the component. There are other factors beyond the unit cost or piece price. So what are the direct and indirect costs associated with a sensor technology? Let me start with some definitions and then give you an example that most of us have encountered in our lives. Direct costs have a fixed dollar amount assigned to a specific good or service that is a vital defined component point in the production process. Indirect costs are costs that are incurred while producing the product, but these costs aren't always predictable or part of a defined step within the production process. These costs may not necessarily have a direct attributable dollar amount and can come in the form of additional time spent or lost from design revisions, delays in receipt of material, waste in production, and other things. Let me give you a very relatable example. Think about the cost of a car. Maybe you've narrowed down your search to one or two different models that will serve your needs and style, but that's really just the beginning. When you're on a budget, it's wise to factor in not only the purchase price of the car itself, but also the factors that influence the overall cost of owning a car, like how expensive is this car to insure? What about fuel consumption? If you drive a lot, then how many miles to the gallon does the car get? Does it take regular or premium fuel? These are all hidden and indirect costs of ownership. What's the length of the warranty? If the car breaks, how expensive will it be to repair? If you live far from the dealership, do I need to find a special mechanic nearby for any repairs? You might start to see that once you consider your complete situation, the car that you thought was affordable based on its price now may be less affordable in the long run. Obviously, this is a simplified scenario, but these same principles also apply to the technology investment. You're designing a new device with a sensor component. You've projected what the quantities you will need. You've narrowed down your technology options to 2 different sensors and suppliers. You've done some initial testing, and both options seem likely to meet the established specifications, at least on paper. Both suppliers seem to fit in the same budgetary ballpark for a piece price, which is a direct cost. Now you need to put the sensors to the test and develop a prototype, which is where the indirect costs start to add up. The next few slides share some of the questions to have on your list to help you sort out these direct and indirect costs and assess potential risks. Let's start with the direct costs. First, how complicated will the component be to integrate? With resistive force sensors, for example, a large dynamic range of resistance allows the design engineer to use electronics that do not require filtering. Some sensor technology options may require you to outsource your electronics development due to their complexity. This definitely adds to the cost of production. In addition, depending on the application, if the sensor sensitivity can be adjusted simply by changing the drive voltage and the resistance of the feedback resistor, it will allow you to get more range or mileage out of your sensor. This can also make your device easier to use if you're designing devices with a field or in-production calibration or adjustment capabilities. Depending on variables like the size of the component you need, the required quantities, it could also be more cost-effective to customize the component for your design. For example, someone looking for a sensor that is on the smaller side and at large quantities might determine that having a custom sensor made actually saves them money in the long run. This brings the concept of NRE and tooling into the discussion with your supplier, which can be a significant direct cost. Your supplier should be able to demonstrate their experience and walk you through the entire customization process. Moving into some indirect costs considerations, one critical factor that often gets overlooked is the availability of application engineering support as you work through your sensor integration and production and product design. As an engineer myself, we're problem solvers by nature, and there is a temptation to try and figure everything out on our own. Usually this trait serves us well. However, when time and deadlines are involved, having experts and resources available can be vital to helping you stay on schedule and be efficient, especially early on in the integration process. You really should take advantage of the resources that your vendors offer so you can focus on other core tasks and goals. In the 20+ years that TechScan has been working with customers on the sensor integration process, we've learned a lot about how to best assist customers and help them anticipate and avoid possible obstacles. We have a very experienced application engineering group who are dedicated to helping customers embed our sensors, and we urge customers to engage with them early on in their process. Another important factor to consider is, as you work on a project, is the availability of integration collateral provided by your vendor. These technical resources can help you sort through typical design questions, like the best interface materials to optimize sensor performance, calibration techniques, and other mechanical and electrical recommendations. Does your supplier offer integration tools to help you streamline your process? While every application is unique, the sensor integration process follows a set of core checkpoints that begin with sensor characterization and end with transfer to production. Sensor characterization is the process of establishing and understanding the fundamental performance of the sensing technology in a controlled environment. TechScan offers sensor characterization kits for engineers to collect important baseline performance data that will benefit them throughout the later integration phases. It allows them to test sensor performance via a desktop sensor loading fixture and pre-programmed loading profiles. The output of these sensor loading profiles can be measured using one of our 3 included circuits that is typically recommended with the sensor. This tool allows engineers to select the circuit that best suits their needs, saving them valuable time in troubleshooting and debugging in the later stages of the integration. Tools like these make the integration process far more efficient than simply guessing and checking. The next questions will cover ones that may help you assess a supplier's stability and whether their standing could be a risk to your supply chain. Some of the questions do not always have a direct answer, but there are some clear signals to keep on your radar. First, what third-party quality and manufacturing certifications does your supplier have? There are obvious considerations included here. An ISO 13485 certification is especially important for the medical device industry, but there are others like RoHS, GMP, and REACH. These certifications demonstrate that your supplier will go the extra mile to earn your trust. If the company manufactures in-house, to what quality control standards and assurances do they adhere? Are all components 100% tested before leaving the factory? What assurances and documentations do they provide for component-to-component or shipment-to-shipment variation? You should ask these questions before making your investment. We have heard unsettling stories from companies who have approached us after having designed in a competitor's product, only to come across issues months later where the product's formulation had changed, which affected its performance. Again, your supplier should be transparent about their process and provide clear assurances. Some companies can expedite the design process by making their tooling in-house, whereas some companies may need to outsource. This can help you get a product to market faster. Another important factor to consider is whether the supplier can actually meet your expectations for quantities and delivery schedule. Now, what happens if your company experiences rapid growth? Is your supplier's manufacturing capacity flexible enough to grow along with you? This may include both a need for additional manpower, machinery, and/or physical space at their facility. Working here. Another important part to the volume and delivery schedule discussion is whether your supplier can provide components to you at the volume and frequency that you need. This could be something like a monthly delivery schedule or being able to ship varying quantities at different times throughout the year. Your supplier should work with you to determine a delivery schedule that works for both of you. If you can establish regular deliveries over a regular time frame versus having a single massive delivery of components, it can work to your advantage. For instance, say you need 30,000 pieces over the course of a year and wish to take delivery of 5,000 pieces every 2 months. Your supplier may appreciate this because they will have a predictable order and can plan for level manufacturing. And it can work to your advantage by potentially lowering the unit price since you're ordering 30,000 units while agreeing to accept regular deliveries on a schedule that works for both of you. However, what if there is a sudden spike in demand for your product? We certainly saw this happen over the last several months with PPE equipment and medical supplies. Can your supplier pivot quickly to keep up with your needs? You should have these discussions with your supplier before engaging in a supply agreement and make sure they are both capable of responding and willing to put assurances in place. If your supplier's manufacturing facility is located in a different country than your factory is located, then you'll need to consider import and duty fees. During times of global instability, which you have all experienced firsthand during the last 3 months, shipments can be delayed, sometimes significantly, depending on where the components are originating. During this recent crisis, TechScan customers have been fortunate and experienced minimal disruption and delays due to their order fulfillments. But medical device manufacturers and other essential businesses rely on our sensors, our manufacturing and operations rely on our sensors. Our manufacturing and operations personnel have continued to report to our factory in Boston with extensive safety protocols in place, and we've been able to continue our sensor production without interruption. In the unfortunate event of a disruption to the global economy, will your supplier be able to deliver your components to you in a timely fashion? Even in so-called normal times, this is an important consideration. On the other hand, what if you work for a company with a production facility located in a different country. If your supplier does not have a global distribution channel with a partner in that region, your supply chain could be at risk. In TechScan's case, our manufacturing is based in the US, but half of our business is international. So it's important that we can properly attend to the needs of all of our customers. Having local distributors in many countries around the world who can overcome any language barriers and who understand critical cultural nuances is so important. So think about all the different stakeholders that will need these embedded components and where they are geographically located. Then challenge your supplier to make sure they can meet your needs. Lastly, ask your supplier how they continue to innovate. What you're really asking with this question is, how do I know your company will be around for the long haul? Our stability is demonstrated by the fact that we've been in business for over 30 years. In the sensor industry, new companies pop up every year. Will they be around in 5 years? But longevity is not enough. Healthy, stable suppliers can demonstrate their stability through their investment in their own R&D efforts. For instance, TechScan invests over 14% of its revenues on R&D and innovation, whereas most industries invest an average of around 5%. In some cases, companies may openly mention industry partners they've worked with, including other companies or third-party associations. What companies they have worked with is a good barometer for assessing the stability of your supplier. And finally, do they have the applications expertise and manufacturing experience to be a stable partner in your supply chain? So that covers my top line suggestions for things to look for and ask from your component supplier. It's probably safe to say that we're all certainly in a heightened state of awareness and selectivity given the recent events of the world. Whether you're working on a new device or weighing your options in order to save costs on the next generation of your current device, you shouldn't be shy in demanding more from your component supplier. So, ask as many questions as you need, demand proof and clarity, and keep the complete technology investment at the top of your mind at all times. On that note, I'd like to hear questions from you in the audience.
Thanks, Charlie. Now, before we begin with today's Q&A, please direct your attention to our webinar survey available on the right of the slides window. If you closed the survey, you can reopen the widget by clicking the icon along the bottom of your screen. Thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in this survey allows us to better serve you. As a reminder, to participate in Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the slides window or click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If we are not able to answer all submitted questions during today's webinar, we'll be sure to share them with our speaker who can reply to you offline. And with that, we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. Our first question, with the challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic in recent months, has your factory experienced any manufacturing delays, or have you been delayed in getting shipments to customers? And if so, how have you responded?
Fortunately, TechScan has not experienced any delays in our manufacturing nor in getting shipments to customers. We're located in Boston, Massachusetts in the US, and in early March, when the US began to take action to flatten the curve, the governor of our state issued a stay-at-home orders. This meant that all non-essential business in the state had to close. However, because TechScan supplies essential components to manufacturers of life-saving medical devices, and we serve other essential industries, we were able to remain open. Our manufacturing production employees were able to continue to report to our factory and continue to make product and make product and ship them without interruption. We'd actually been monitoring the situation quite closely even before the stay-at-home orders. We adapted our manufacturing floor to adhere to greater physical separation, social distancing, and capacity guidelines without interrupting our delivery schedules or compromising product quality. Thanks to these efforts, we've not experienced any interruptions to our operations or our customers' supply chain.
Okay, great. The next question, in my experience, I've often received better pricing on components whose supplier outsources manufacturing. What is the added value of working with a supplier who manufactures in-house?
Well, that's a great question. Well, when you work with a supplier who manufactures in-house, meaning at their own facility, you'll often see, as you've stated, that direct costs like piece price may sometimes be a bit more. However, the indirect costs are often where you will see the savings add up. The key to remember here is quality. In-house manufacturing typically means more stringent quality standards. With the reduced cost of outsourced goods, there is the risk of compromised quality standards. When you work with a supplier who manufactures sensors in-house, you'll generally find greater transparency on the manufacturing process, capabilities, and challenges. We've had experiences where we've been approached by customers who had been purchasing an embedded component from a company who outsourced their sensor manufacturing. The customer was caught off guard when the supplier abruptly began delaying their order acknowledgement and pushing out shipment dates. The outsourced manufacturer producing the component had unexpectedly gone lying down and did not communicate this to the supplier. This led to the end user not knowing about the problem until after the first delivery was missed. As a result, the end user needed to scramble to find another supplier in time to fulfill their orders. This is just one example of the risk, lack of visibility, and poor communication that often come with working with a supplier who does not have full control over their manufacturing processes. Suppliers who manufacture in-house are able to foresee, react, and communicate manufacturing issues more reliably to their customers than a supplier who outsources their manufacturing.
Great. Our next question is it a red flag if a manufacturer does not openly state that they conduct 100% testing of components?
No, it's not. Reliable product testing can be done via an AQL or sample testing. The quality standards your supplier abides by is critical here to ensure that the appropriate procedures and sample sizes are being used to test components.
Okay. And what are some other supply chain considerations you would take into account in today's climate if you were about to go to the market?
That's another good question. I'd probably advise that you hedge your bets. Identify alternative or secondary suppliers for your components whenever possible. There are a few reasons for this. As I mentioned earlier, you might discover an issue in your current supplier's manufacturing practices that you just can't live with, and you need to find someone else who will introduce less risk to your supply chain. Also, for some of the global issues I mentioned earlier, it's always good to have a backup supplier as a just in case. The second piece of advice would probably be around order scheduling. You want to ensure your order schedules not only reflect your sales forecast, but accommodate for any anticipated supply chain challenges and setbacks, as brought on by COVID, for example. I would also reiterate the importance of a robust sales channel. I touched on this a bit in the presentation, but identifying a supplier who has experience working with local distributors and resellers is wise, because a supplier with a robust sales channel will provide added stability to your supply.
Okay. And our next question, as far as applications engineering services, I can see how this could save us a lot of time on our project, as force and pressure sensors are not our core business, and there would be a learning curve. Is there a separate fee for this service?
Great question. I mentioned application engineering in the presentation as an indirect cost savings. That is a way of helping customers save time and money. TechScan has been around for a long time. We see that as an advantage to our customers. We've seen a lot. New companies pop up frequently, especially in the sensor space. But going with a supplier that has been around for a long time typically comes with the benefit of specialized applications and engineering expertise that can only come from experience. We've been there, done that, and our applications engineers can steer you towards potential pitfalls in the integration process. That saves you time and ultimately dollars. Applications engineers can also help you optimize interface circuitry with your component to optimize performance, costs, and component lifetime. For example, TechScan recently had a customer whose sensor interface circuit was a dual supply, zero crossing op-amp. The reference voltage of the sensor was set at 5 volt DC. Our application engineering team analyzed the circuit and was able to recommend a single source op-amp circuit with a reference voltage of 0.5 volt. The difference in linearity between the single and dual source circuit was negligible. Changing from single supply from a dual supply circuit was advantageous to the customer as it saved costs on a second power supply and board space. The lower reference voltage produced limited current through the sensor and helped ensure the longest possible sensor life.
Okay. And next, as far as applications engineering services,
oh, we answered that.
Yep, you're right. Good catch. The next question actually is it better to have a backup supplier, or is it possible, if possible, to source from 2 suppliers?
It's probably, in my opinion, it depends on the order volume between the two. If you've got enough to have a secondary supplier, that is a good choice. But if it's not a significant enough volume, it usually doesn't warrant a second supplier so much as a backup supplier.
Okay, great. And it does look like we're coming to the end of our Q&A. There's, again, if we didn't get to your question, the questions will be shared with the speaker to answer offline. But thank you, and we appreciate your time and expertise on today's topic. Thank you to our sponsor, TechScan, as well as to everyone in the audience, and of course, thank you to Charlie. We appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to the event live. This webinar is copyright 2020 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Informa Markets. Our speaker, Charlie Malacaria, is solely responsible for his content and opinions. I am Amanda Peterson. Thank you for your time and have a great day.